I prefer to be alone rather than to be around people who are trashy.
You frighten men.
You have to ask them.
Well,
I'm asking you.
Yes.
Picture Eartha Kitt, the woman who purred her way through Santa Baby, ominously staring down the First Lady of the United States at a White House luncheon. In 1968, Eartha Kitt stood up in a room full of society ladies and told Lady Bird Johnson, unflinchingly, why the youth of America was rebelling. The room went silent. Lady Bird burst into tears. By nightfall, the headlines were screaming, and the CIA was smearing Kitt as a sadistic nymphomaniac in a secret report. Washington blacklisted her overnight. The scandal nearly ruined Eartha. Yet in hindsight, it made her a legend. It revealed that the kittenish diva had claws, and she wasn't afraid to use them. The edgiest moment of her career turned Eartha Kitt into an icon of truth-telling, even as it almost cost her everything. And, well, that's just one chapter in the wild story of how a poor, mixed-race girl from the Jim Crow South became one of the most fascinating and misunderstood figures in our culture. If you only have 30 seconds, here's the bottom line of this video. She took every hardship life hurled at her and used it as fuel. All the manure that has been thrown on me is just fertilizer to make me stronger, as she said. The result was a persona so playful, so sexy, and so ferociously self-assured that she became the blueprint of cool for generations to come. She purred and flirted and danced like no one else. And she spoke up the truth to power. Her secret, if anyone can even replicate it, was an unshakable sense of self. She never compromised who she was. That's how Eartha Kitt became Eartha Kitt. But if you'd like a bit more of an explanation, the backstory, the scandals, the beauty secrets, and the lessons we can learn from Miss Kitt, follow me, because this one is truly a ride.
Welcome. I'm Kira, and this is your beauty blueprint.
I've spent a whole week researching, watching, and obsessing over all things Eartha. Her films, interviews, biographies, to distill her very essence and share the best of my findings with you. And let me tell you, Eartha Kitt's essence is rich. A sultry chanteuse, an outspoken rebel, and a self-made style icon. There's a lot more to her than a Christmas novelty song and a Catwoman costume. We're talking about a woman who could do one-armed push-ups in a skin-tight gown at 50, who spoke 4 languages, who was so audacious that presidents had to silence her. Intrigued yet? Well, you should be. Eartha is one of a kind. And do stick around, because by the end of this video I'll serve up a quick practical breakdown of what we can learn from Eartha Kitt's unique style universe. Quick favor. If you enjoy intelligent dissections like this, please like and subscribe. It's easy for you to do, I promise, and makes a huge difference to me. Even better are comments and shares. And Eartha's blueprint is one of the best to share with a friend, I believe. Thank you. Of course, I also designed for us a limited edition Eartha Kitt t-shirt. And to all our channel members, thank you. You make these videos possible. And if you're not a member yet, consider joining for members-only perks, including bonus podcast episodes. It would be a great way to support the channel. Alright, settle in, perhaps with a glass of champagne. Eartha would approve, darling. Or even a saucer of milk if you're feeling catty. And let's start at the beginning. Who was Eartha Kitt, and how did she come to be the global face of cool, sly provocation? Here's a little backstory. Well, unsurprisingly, Eartha Mae Kitt's origin story reads like the setup of a Dickens novel. She was born in 1927 on a cotton plantation in tiny North, South Carolina. Her mother, Annie Mae, was a black woman of Cherokee descent, only 14 years old when Eartha was born. And Eartha's father was white, and, by most accounts, absent and unknown to her. In the segregated deep south of the 20s, being a light-skinned black child was a curse. Eartha was called a yellow gal. Not a compliment, but an insult, implying she thought she was better than others, when, in reality, she was just a child who didn't fit in. She later said the black community shunned her because of her pale complexion, and white society certainly didn't accept her either. She was an outsider from birth. Her entire childhood was, frankly, nightmarish. Eartha's mother gave her away to relatives when she remarried, because her new husband didn't want a mixed-race stepchild in the house. That aunt treated her cruelly. She was horribly abused in the South. She was beaten, mistreated, emotionally and physically. By around age 7, more trauma struck. Eartha witnessed her own mother's death under really disturbing circumstances. It seems her mother had been poisoned, perhaps a victim of voodoo. The passing was not natural. It's a haunting image. A little girl seeing her mother on her deathbed and a baby, her half-sibling, being passed over the dying body, a scene Eartha interpreted as a final ritual to break a curse. Whether or not that was true, the effect on Eartha was irreversible. She was now truly alone in the world. At around 8 years old, she boarded a train to New York to stay with her distant relatives. One imagines this tiny, traumatized girl arriving in 30s Harlem, probably malnourished, speaking with a southern twang, scarred and scared, no doubt. Yet fast forward to her teenage years, Eartha found refuge in performing. A friend dared the 16-year-old Eartha to audition for the famed Katherine Dunham dance troupe. It was the first major black modern dance company, and Eartha had almost no formal training, but she did have raw talent. She tried out, and of course, she made it. Shy, skinny Eartha Kitt became a professional dancer, touring with the troupe all over the world. The moment Eartha Kitt left America, she began to find herself. Paris cabarets welcomed this exotic young dancer with open arms, and Eartha, in turn, fell deeply, passionately in love with Paris. She performed night after night, developing what one writer later called the persona of a cenedal sybarite, basically a worldly, unshockable pleasure seeker. She started singing too, purring her way through suggestive numbers like C'est si bon and Love for Sale, songs that would become her signatures. Just imagine that scene. Smoky French cabaret, young Eartha Kitt in a slinky gown, seducing the audience with a languid, knowing stare and that unmistakable voice, velvety and raspy as if pouring honey over sandpaper. It was then, in Europe, that Eartha Kitt became the Eartha Kitt. Her big break came courtesy of one Orson Welles. Yes, the legendary director Orson Welles. He saw Eartha perform and was so entranced that he cast her as Helen of Troy in his stage production of Faust, renamed Time Runs. This was a pretty bold casting choice. Helen of Troy, the mythical, most beautiful woman in the world, but portrayed by a black actress in 1950. Fear not, Eartha lived up to the role, and then some. Of course she did. Orson Welles became positively smitten. He later pronounced Eartha Kitt the most exciting woman alive. Rumor has it he proved it by biting her on stage during one of her scenes as a show of enthusiasm. Oh dear. The press in Europe had a field day with that anecdote. Eartha, for her part, found it amusing. A great publicity boost. She then returned to New York and exploded onto the American scene. Kitt won a role in the Broadway revue New Faces, where she performed a Rise solo number called Monotonous. The song's lyrics joked that, despite hobnobbing with movie stars, she found life monotonous. And Eartha delivered it with such tongue-in-cheek boredom that it brought the house down. The New York Times wrote that Eartha Kitt not only looks incendiary, but she can make a song burst. Talk about a rave review. In a single season, she went from unknown to the toast of the town. What made Eartha stand out was that she simply did not fit any mold. She created one of her very own. At barely over 5 feet tall, she really somehow radiated the presence of a 6-foot bombshell. One writer nicknamed her the original material girl. Decades before Madonna, Eartha Kitt was purring about diamonds, furs, and nightclubs. Her Santa Baby became an instant classic, a playful gold digger's Christmas list. Top radio stations played this song about a black woman sensually asking Santa for convertibles and Tiffany's baubles, which in 1953 was still pretty subversive, if you think about it. But she got mainstream America to hum along, and she parlayed her fame into a Hollywood career too. She made splashes in films like St. Louis Blues and Anna Lucasta, and yes, of course, she had her share of high-profile romances. Perhaps most famously, she had an affair with Charles Revson, the billionaire founder of Revlon Cosmetics. Charles Revson was so enamored that he created a lipstick inspired by her, a shade called Fire and Ice. Because what else do you give a woman who's all warm seduction and cool sass? Eartha was also linked to banking heirs, film producers, you name it. But most interestingly, she married a relatively humble man, Bill McDonald, a white-bread real estate investor. This caused a minor scandal. A black celebrity marrying a simple white man raised eyebrows all over. They had a daughter, Kit McDonald. What a cool idea for a name. But the marriage didn't last. Eartha divorced McDonald soon after, swearing off marriage for good. By the mid-60s, she was a bona fide star in every imaginable public arena, and then came one of her most iconic roles. In 1967, Eartha stepped into the role of Catwoman. Now, this was a campy, primetime superhero show, wildly popular, and Catwoman was a vixenish villain famously played by Julie Newmar in earlier seasons. When Eartha took over, she became one of the first black actresses to land a non-stereotypical, glamorous role on a major network TV show. Little black girls all over America got to see a woman who looked like them. Well, sort of. Eartha was, after all, singular. Being seductive, powerful, and equal in stature to the white male hero. And white America loved her too, because Eartha's Catwoman was delicious. How amazing. She slinked around in a skin-tight black catsuit, hands on her hips, purring out lines like, "How can Batgirl be the best anything when Catwoman is around?" She even openly flirted with Batman on screen, breaking the unspoken TV taboo against portraying interracial attraction. The chemistry sizzled, much to the censor's discomfort. Eartha's Catwoman was so memorable that it basically became the template for Catwoman going forward. That mix of slinky sex appeal and playful menace that every actress from Michelle Pfeiffer to Zoe Kravitz has tried to replicate ever since. To this day, every Halloween you'll see Catwoman costumes inspired by Eartha Kitt's version. It was a pop culture triumph, and now at this point you might be thinking, wow, what a life. But Eartha's story was about to take a sharp turn.
And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for.
Up next, we're going to talk about how Eartha Kitt went toe-to-toe with the president and paid the ultimate price. And later, we'll get into her personal secrets, including how she kept rocking those one-of-a-kind looks well into her 70s. So don't go anywhere. So, the year now is 1968. America is in turmoil. Vietnam War protests, civil unrest, divided nation. Eartha Kitt at this point is also involved in social causes. She's working with youth organizations, teaching dance to underprivileged kids. Perhaps that's why President's office invited Eartha to a women doers luncheon at the White House, a gathering of influential women to discuss juvenile delinquency. The First Lady hoped for a polite brainstorming session on keeping kids out of trouble. Well, Eartha Kitt gave them more than they bargained for. President Lyndon Johnson himself dropped in briefly and spouted some platitudes about funding daycares. After he left, Eartha, who had been dying to speak, finally got the nod. She stood up, elegant, fearless, and said essentially that all this talk was missing the point. The real issue, she insisted, was the war in Vietnam. Young men were being drafted and snatched off from their mothers to be shot and maimed, in an unjust war, she argued. No wonder the kids rebel and take pot, she explained to the First Lady. In case you don't understand the lingo, that's marijuana. Yes, she really said that at the White House. Eartha's tone was certainly rather blunt, and the women in the room were stunned into silence. Lady Bird Johnson was brought to tears. Well, the backlash was swift and vicious. Eartha Kitt denounces war policy to Mrs. Johnson, blared the front page of the New York Times the next day. It painted Kitt as having shouted and cursed out the First Lady, although witnesses assured she did not shout or use profanity at all. But papers sneered that Kitt had shouted angrily and called her belligerent. Many reports also made a point to highlight that Kitt was a black woman, almost as if to underline the uppityness of her daring to speak up in that setting. The implication was clear. How dare she, a black entertainer, scold the First Lady in her own home? But outside that bubble, a lot of regular people thought Eartha had a point. A protest group called Women's Strike for Peace actually picketed in support of Kitt the very next day outside the White House. She struck a nerve, clearly. Yet Lyndon Johnson was furious. The president essentially blacklisted Eartha Kitt. The contracts were cancelled, bookings disappeared. Dates simply started getting cancelled. I didn't know what it was for then, but one club owner told me, "You're a problem," Eartha later said. Johnson's administration sicked the FBI and CIA on her. In 1975, it came out that the CIA had compiled a dossier on Eartha Kitt right after the luncheon. They dug up any crumb of rumor to discredit her, even suggesting she had a vile tongue and was a spoiled child. One CIA report outrageously described her as a sadistic nymphomaniac, a slur that says more about the era's racist, sexist fears than about Kitt. Her status as a black woman who dared to speak out made her an easy target for a government eager to make an example. So Eartha Kitt effectively became persona non grata. It was devastating. Eartha later said that for years she couldn't find any work in the US. But here's where her resilience kicked in. Rather than shrink, she went abroad. She spent most of the late 60s and early 70s successfully performing in Europe and Asia. And after a decade of exile, Eartha staged a triumphant US comeback. In 1978, she was invited back to the White House by President Jimmy Carter. Talk about full circle. Carter greeted her with a big, warm handshake and the words, "I am glad to have you back." By then, America's attitude shifted and the Vietnam War was over. In fact, many realized Kitt had been right about that war. Eartha stepped back into the American spotlight via Broadway. Well, talent always wins in the end. From the 80s onward, Eartha Kitt enjoyed a fabulous second act. At age 57, she scored an unexpected hit on Billboard charts with a sultry song called "Where Is My Man?", which became a smash in gay clubs from Europe to NYC. Always ahead of her time, Eartha essentially became a camp icon for the LGBT community before it was a thing. By the early 90s, another generation met Eartha Kitt through a comedy film, Boomerang. She lampooned her own man-eater image as an over-the-top cosmetics mogul, Lady Eloise, a glamorous cougar who hilariously seduces Eddie Murphy's character. All she had to do was purr, "Marcus, darling," in that inimitable way, and she stole the whole movie. The fact that in her mid-60s, she could still believably play a woman who could make a young man stammer, that says everything you need to know about the force of nature, that was Eartha. Even into the 2000s, Eartha kept touring with her one-woman shows, often in cabaret venues. People who saw her live reported that she could still do a split, drop into a feline crawl, and practically climb a grand piano while singing, all with that extreme, effortless sensuality. In 2007, just a year before her death, she did a run at New York's Café Carlyle and ended every show by purring her way through the song "I Want to Be Evil" to rapturous applause. She never lost her it. Eartha Kitt passed away on Christmas Day 2008 at home in Connecticut after a battle with cancer. Fittingly, the radio that week was anyway filled with the sound of her younger voice cooing "Santa Baby" on that endless holiday rotation. She was 81, and truly she left this world stage with an encore. So, who was Eartha Kitt, really? Beneath all those roles in 9 lives? Now let's talk about the persona she created, that distinctive Eartha Kitt vibe. She often spoke of Eartha Kitt in third person, like she was a role she played. There was Eartha May, the little girl who felt rejected and hurt. And then there was Eartha Kitt, the fabulous creature she became, who feared nothing, or at least acted like she feared nothing. She famously embraced the nickname Sex Kitten, even leaning into it by often purring like a cat. But make no mistake, there was nothing meek or trivial about her version of a sex kitten. Eartha basically invented that archetype. Camille Paglia, our beloved cultural critic, once wrote, "Cats are autocrats of naked self-interest, immoral and immoral, consciously breaking rules." Doesn't that sound exactly like Eartha? Predatory. Like a cat, she seemed to answer to no one's laws but her own. She was playful, but could turn dangerous on a dime. She might toy with you, but heaven help you if you tried to control her. She even had that cat-like grace. And her signature purr was more than a gimmick. It was a symbol of her power. A purr is a sound a cat makes when it's content and in charge. Eartha's rolling R's and throaty growls were her way of telegraphing to the world, "I'm comfortable in my skin, I enjoy myself, and I don't give a damn if you find it a bit much." At a time when women, especially black women, were expected to be modest and humble, Eartha was shamelessly sensual and self-possessed. Alongside Lena Horne, she was one of the first African-American sex symbols, but Eartha's flavor of sex symbol was unique to her and her only. She projected a knowingness, as if she'd seen it all, and could comment wryly on life's absurdities, winking at you. She was never ever the doe-eyed ingenue. It's a persona that in some ways prefigured what would be called the diva or the femme fatale, only Eartha did it with humor. There was always mischief in her act. "I fall in love with myself and I want someone to share it with me," she said. "And I want someone to share me with me." I'll say that again. Share me with me. She's basically saying my life is fabulous. You can come enjoy it with me, but I'm not ceding control. It doesn't get more empowered than that. Eartha had unique opinions on society and art, and she was clearly never afraid to voice them. On the topic of race, Eartha refused to be defined by color. She knew what it was to be ostracized by both black and white communities, so she just sort of transcended it. Eartha Kitt has no color, she said. And she prided herself on performing for all audiences. In fact, she often opened her shows by pointedly greeting all the beautiful people, no matter their race or background. But offstage, some who knew Eartha personally say she was quite different from her onstage persona. Her daughter has described how Eartha, the mother, was actually very proper, strict, and even shy. At home, Eartha loved to garden. She grew vegetables and roses. She'd tell people, "Don't buy me diamonds or furs, give me land. They're not making any more land." That woman, all draped in jewels, while in real life she'd show up to fancy restaurants with Tupperware to take leftovers home to compost in her garden, to her daughter's mortification. Eartha had zero shame about being frugal and earthy. There's something wonderfully honest about that duality. It's as if her connection to her impoverished roots never left her. Perhaps that grounded side is what kept her sane and kind. Friends noted she actually treated everyone with respect, from cab drivers to co-stars, and expected the same in return. And then there's Eartha's resilience. She took the literal and figurative manure, the insults and rejections, and grew stronger, like a rose bush absorbing waste and turning it into fragrance. And in maintaining her instrument, her body and voice, Eartha was disciplined. Long before yoga and wellness were trendy, Eartha Kitt was doing yoga and morning stretches. She even studied yoga with Indra Devi, one of the first huge yoga gurus. It kept her limber enough that even in her old age, she could do high kicks on stage. So please let's remember to do the same. It is not a gimmick. It works. Almost every person I talked about on here did this. It's no wonder she could still sing live in her 80s with power. She treated her body as her precious tool, which is part of why her beauty endured alongside her spirit. Now, before we dive into the details of Eartha Kitt's style tips, I have to ask, do you have a favorite Eartha Kitt moment or quote? I'm so curious. Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this, give it a thumbs up. It really supports the channel and tells me to keep them coming. Okay, let's get practical. The Eartha Kitt Beauty Blueprint. Visually, Eartha Kitt had a signature look that constantly evolved, but certain elements did remain constant. Let's start with that face. She had incredible bone structure, and she knew how to accentuate it. You'll notice she often had bold, arched eyebrows and a well-defined eye. Eartha was a big fan of the cat eye eyeliner. How appropriate. Her skin always had a healthy glow. Now, part of that was her genetics, but she also took care of it. In her later years, she wrote a book called Rejuvenate. It's Never Too Late, all about aging gracefully and staying radiant. She recommended things like staying hydrated, stretching, taking care of your mental health, all of which show up on your face. Here's a link to it. Eartha's complexion into her 70s was envy-worthy, smooth with laugh lines that only added character. Here I just want to accentuate this point. Laugh lines are beautiful. Please, let's consider abstaining from all those Botox treatments that freeze our beautiful, unique faces into lifeless masks. And Eartha Kitt wasn't one for the trend of heavy contour or anything. She kept it classy. A bit of blush to highlight her cheeks, a defined lip, often a natural berry or a classic red. And that's it. In fact, recall that Revlon lipstick Fire and Ice was said to be inspired by her. It still exists. You can easily buy it. Here's a link. Now, fashion. Eartha Kitt loved glamour. Her wardrobe was filled with glamorous gowns. For stalls, it was the era of old-school glamour after all, and costumes that accentuated her lithe dancer's physique. She wasn't afraid of sparkles or feathers. She often performed in curve-hugging dresses with mermaid silhouettes or dramatic flared skirts that she could swirl around. Let's just say she understood showmanship in clothing well. In daily life, though, she could be quite minimalist and chic. A simple knit turtleneck and capri pants with ballet flats, looking every inch the 50s Hollywood starlet, or a well-tailored suit when meeting dignitaries. Tailored suits on women are such a delicious thing. Think Marlene Dietrich. Here, the key was that everything fit her impeccably. Tailoring is something we can definitely take from her blueprint. She was an off-the-rack kind of gal unless it really looked perfect. One of Eartha's most famous fashion moments is a photo shoot of her in a sleek black turtleneck and slacks, crawling panther-like on a white rug. Extremely simple outfit, but she made even that iconic. Don't be afraid to show off your figure. Eartha was proud of her compact, curvaceous frame. She wasn't supermodel-like, but she dressed to highlight her small waist, toned legs, and graceful arms. She once joked, "I'm just an old-fashioned girl with an old-fashioned figure," as she shimmied her hips for emphasis. It got a laugh, but also a whistle or two. Confidence was her best accessory. And speaking of those, Eartha loved a good dramatic accessory. Long opera gloves, statement earrings, maybe a glamorous hat in the 50s. But she also knew that she was the most interesting thing in the room, so she didn't overdo it. Eartha could make a plain dress look unforgettable, but she also kept a bit of mystery. No earnest oversharing. In our tell-all era, a little mystery would be refreshing. You don't have to reveal all your cards. Don't explain. It's fun.